So if I could ask the representative from Edinburgh University to come forward, please. Okay, welcome. Just a reminder that you have 10 minutes to make your presentation to committee, and if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself before you begin, that would be great. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Dr. Coree Brown Swan. I'm a researcher at the university, but part of a group of mums within the School of Social and Political Science. I'm a working mum and a daily Lothian bus user, and I'm here representing the 3,800 signatories to our change.org petition about access to buses for parents and carers, and particularly in regard to the new 100-seaters of Lothian buses. We're very grateful for the support of Councillor Mains, McInnes and Arthur, who have engaged with us on these issues and put forward motions today. I think really what I'd like to say today is that we're all Lothian buses users. We support the system. We're very grateful for the quality of the bus service in Edinburgh. And so we're very disappointed. We understand the recent changes in the 100 buses as a backward step. I wasn't a parent at the time and don't remember this necessarily, but we feel that this buggy battle has been fought and won by parents before us. I was reading the Lothian Buses Accessibility Report last night, and they issued a report in 2012 that suggested that going forward, buses would be retrofitted and new buses would have both a buggy and wheelchair space. And on these new buses, that's not the case. In 2012, Lothian Buses began to lead the way on accessibility for disabled and elderly users and for parents, and contributed to Edinburgh Council's aims to encourage sustainable transport, reduce congestion, and encourage workforce participation. The Lothian Buses said that in 2011, 10,000 bus rides were taken by buggies each week, and I imagine that's increased. Just about every bus I get on these days has a buggy on it. And we heard from 3,800 parents, grandparents, carers, and members of the public who were sympathetic to our request. And we heard some really moving stories about how bus usage was so important in the lives of parents and carers and grandparents, and how the new buses have had a negative impact. I do encourage you, if you are interested, we had hundreds of responses to this survey who told these stories. We heard from mums who struggled with postpartum depression, for whom the buses were both a lifeline and an obstacle for them accessing core services. Mums and dads struggling to get to work on time, left by the side of the road for bus after bus. Parents, grandparents, and carers with disabilities, which made folding buggies or waiting for the next bus and standing for long periods of time difficult. And people increasingly resorting to cars. I can't get on the bus, I'm just gonna take the car. Which seems to fly in the face of goals around sustainable transport and the low emission zones. It speaks to all of that. We also heard from disabled users concerned about the position that the lack of bus space placed them in. I attended the Edinburgh Bus Users Group, and I just heard this really heartbreaking story of a man with an adult son in a wheelchair. He's a primary carer for his son, and they used the bus to get out and about to access services. And he arrived at a stop recently to find a mum with a pram who'd been waiting and unable to board 2 buses. And she said, of course, you need to go first. It's your legal priority. It's the moral priority that the wheelchair user has this space. But he was mortified. He was so upset that he had to cut in front of a mum with a sleeping baby. And this shouldn't happen. This shouldn't be a choice, and this shouldn't be an obstacle for people. We've also heard that we should just fold the buggies. It's your fault. We have these massive prams. Don't ever read below the comments of an Edinburgh Evening News website. The things that people say about women, it's quite grim. But folding the buggy isn't always an option. It may be unsafe if you're trying to keep hold of a young child. Buggies, it's very difficult to have a buggy that's safe and foldable for a child under the age of 6 months. Parents may have disabilities themselves. I have lupus. I have a young child. I'm able to get out and about on the buses, but I would really struggle to hold my toddler and lift my buggy and get it into that space. And we've tried to engage positively with Lothian Buses. As we said, we love the service. We're very grateful for the service, but we've really been dismissed or given conflicting information. That's why I'm here today. They did insist that the buggies do fit, but Councillor Arthur took a trip to Mothercare and measured buggies and was unable to find a buggy that would fit in the wheelchair space. Wheelchair users in other cities have also raised concerns that if there was an emergency stop on the bus and there were buggies and wheelchairs sharing the space, there's a risk of tipping, and a wheelchair could tip on top of a buggy. And the idea that you can get a very small buggy and a very small wheelchair next to each other, you may be able to get them next to each other, but is it safe to do so? Secondly, we heard that there's no legal requirement, and that's correct. Wheelchairs rightly have the priority here, and there's no legal requirement that a buggy should be able to be accessible or should be able to be taken on the bus. But I would hope that a company of Lothian Buses stature would aim for more, would try to exceed these standards. And it's not clear where the company currently stands. The colleagues have been speaking with them, and they said that they won't respond to her queries anymore, that they consider the matter settled. So we're here asking for your help. We know from Councillor McInnes's contributions to the Edinburgh Bus Users Group that the Council has ambitious plans for sustainability and growth, and we really applaud these. However, we think these negative changes to the buses and the potential that these could be rolled out further could undermine these goals, impacting the growing numbers of young families who call Edinburgh their home, and the environment as people resort to cars because they find it so difficult to use the buses. We know that Lothian Buses is a private company, distinct from the Council, but we're hoping that we can work together on a few things. We'd like to understand the process of consultation where disabled users were other user groups consulted. Representatives of Lothian Buses have been vague on this process of consultation and design, and we're really concerned to hear the news that there's not a single employee in charge of monitoring and thinking about accessibility. Perhaps exploring ways to mitigate the impact on these buses, perhaps by distributing them on appropriate routes throughout the city so the residents of 11 and 16 aren't facing the whole brunt. And finally, and most importantly, make sure that going forward that Lothian Buses takes into account these issues. It's an environmental issue, it's an equalities issue, and it's an accessibility issue, and returns to its 2012 commitment to ensuring buses going forward have those two spaces. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions, Councillor Booth?
Thanks very much, Convener. Thanks very much indeed, Coree, for coming along today. And although my kids are 9 and 6, I can still remember the stress and the worry about trying to get them on onto a bus if a buggy space or both buggy spaces are taken. You know, if one of them's asleep, it's a major challenge. Obviously, even if they're not, you have to take them out and put them on the lap of a stranger. The child goes wild at that, and that was stressful for me as an able-bodied, man. Imagine the additional stress that somebody who's disabled or somebody who has, disabled kids would have. So I completely agree with you that we need to ensure that we have accessible buses for all, and I completely agree with your point that the design of the buses at the moment is set up where, in a sense, the conflict between disabled users and those with a buggy is almost inevitable. And I hope that Lothian Buses will listen very carefully to what you're saying and ensure that they change their designs to eliminate that conflict by ensuring that there's sufficient space. My question is, to what extent do you feel that Lothian Buses are responding to your concerns? I understand that they came to the Edinburgh Bus Users Group. Were you satisfied with the responses that you got there, or what further questions do you feel they have to answer?
I think we have been quite disappointed with the response. The managing director, unfortunately, was unable to come to the Edinburgh Bus Users Group, and the representatives there really were not able to answer any specific questions about buggies. They insisted that they do fit, but they weren't able to provide any evidence of that. I'd like to see a photograph of a standard-size NHS-issued wheelchair alongside the kind of everyday buggy that people use, and I think that's where we've really found the frustration. Obviously, there was a mistake made here, and I think we'd like Lothian Buses to acknowledge that mistake and work going forward, figure out a way to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Councillor Arthur.
So, thank you, Corey. Thank you for coming along today. And I want to thank you for the petition as well, because I think quite a lot of the people who contacted me, not just parents, but also people who have mobility problems, etc., I've been reassured by the fact that there's so many people out there experiencing similar problems, and they're not just a single person who's perhaps been a little bit unreasonable. They can see, in fact, they've been entirely reasonable. I think on the last point you made there, I explicitly asked one of the board members of Lothian Buses if, perhaps part of the solution to this, the PR side of this, was just to issue a statement saying that, well, perhaps they should have consulted a little bit more, perhaps they should have taken views on board, but they refused to do that, and I was really disappointed by that, actually. The committee members yesterday were sent a letter by the managing director of Lothian Buses, and in that he says the majority of bus users are positive about these buses. So my question to you is, do you think the issue there is that the majority of people using those buses are able-bodied, and they're not coming on with buggies, they're not coming in with wheelchairs, and they've not got mobility problems?
Sure. At the Edinburgh Bus Users Group, one of the representatives of Lothian Buses said that one of their challenges that they face is that 25% of their users are either 65 plus or have some sort of disabilities. So I think in terms of the customer base, there's a clear need. There's probably another 5% who have young children who are trying to get on buses, who may not have kind of certified disabilities, but may find it challenging to get a buggy aboard the bus, get themselves and their children above the bus. And we also heard from twin parents as well, who have particular, you don't have, you can't grow another arm, to be quite frank about that. So I think yes, people like the look of the buses, but we've seen concern about the accessibility. There was a woman who fell exiting the bus because they're not able to get to the curb. It seems like this is a significant percentage of their customer base who may struggle. We have an aging population. The population's getting older, and hopefully in some ways getting younger as people feel like Edinburgh is a family-friendly place to live. Hopefully you're encouraging more families to live here, and this just seems like a huge segment of the population who aren't being adequately served by these buses.
Mr. Burgess.
Thanks very much for the deputation. My children are of ages with CHAS, so I also have fairly recent experience of getting buggies onto buses. Your deputation is obviously in relation to motion 9.1, which is a motion that was brought by my colleague, Councillor Melanie Main. Following her, she submitted this motion, and then she had some discussions with the convener before the committee, and there's now a composite motion that proposes a set of actions. And I know you haven't been able to see that yet, but I think committee services are actually just bringing a copy of the composite motion now. Very good timing. So the proposal is basically for the convener to write to Lothian Buses about this issue and ask them a series of questions, but also to ask for a meeting of user groups, including parents, with Lothian Buses, and also to invite the managing director of Lothian Buses to this committee so that we can ask him about it as well. So hopefully, and the convener might want to say a bit more about that, hopefully, we'll get a way forward on this and see if we can improve the situation. And the question is, if you've managed to look at the composite motion, whether you think that this is a good way forward.
Absolutely. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to engage on this. I think this is a good way forward. We've been struggling we've asked to have a meeting and been rejected on that. So the committee getting behind it would be very much appreciative. And we want to engage positively and think about how we can improve things for ourselves, but also for other families and families in the future.
I must say I'm liking this self-policing thing that you've got going on when your colleagues are telling you to ask a question. You're saving me a lot of work. Thank you kindly. Councillor Cook, I think you're next.
Thanks, Convener. I can't think of a direct question, so for now my question is whether I can make a few comments, which I'll take as a given.
And as a convener, I would reel that that's a pretty cheeky intervention, but I'll let it go on this occasion. Please go ahead.
It's really just to thank you and others for your campaigning efforts on the issue. I think it's unfortunate that it's really had to reach this stage, but it has been successful, I think, in attracting cross-party support from the committee. And quite rightfully harsh criticism of Lothian buses, and I agree with a lot of what you've said. I've got an 8-month-old baby, which I probably talk about too much, but you're right in what you say that particularly when she was younger, it was a difference between taking the car and actually getting on the bus. Because I just think the younger the child, the more you actually need to have that certainty of getting the space, and the larger your pram is. Some of these sort of foldable buggies, like what Councillor Arthur went to look at in Mothercare, are fine if your kid's older, and if your kid can walk, actually, I think it is much easier to be able to collapse it. But if you have a newborn child, a very young kid, who's in the basket or something like that, you want to go shopping, the bottom of the pram is full of messages, you simply can't collapse it. So you need to have that certainty or that likelihood that you're going to be able to get on the bus and not be waiting for another 20 minutes. By that time, you have a nappy that needs changed or a kid that's screaming for a feed. So I think the practicalities around it have simply not been thought through. So I hope that action today will be passed as anticipated will, and can actually get Lothian buses to do something about this.
Thank you. Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. It was good to see you noted an interest there with your 8-month-old. You're probably an expert on the committee. Thank you very much for your deputation. I recall the changes and the buggies coming back onto buses, which was a great proud moment for Edinburgh, and I was really delighted to see it. Have Lothian buses told you, given you any kind of reason or excuse for this huge backward step in not allowing buggies, or supposedly not allowing a sufficient space for buggies on our bus?
Unfortunately not. We seem to get very different answers from them about whether it would fit at all, or whether you could, how you can access buses. So we haven't had clear answers, and we've heard that they might fit depending on the size of the buggy. There's also issues with the luggage storage. Even if you did fold your buggy, a colleague recently tried to put the folded buggy in the luggage storage, and it tipped over. So the luggage storage is decreased in that space as well. So even if you did fold your buggy, it's not necessarily safe to place it in storage. So we've gotten very conflicting responses. I think that was part of the incentive behind the petition, because before we launched the petition, we had sent letters, we had spoken to them, and as a result of those unsatisfactory answers, we wanted to get a sense of the scale. Were we particularly unlucky? Was it certain routes? Was this a problem that we were just having as working moms commuting into work, and maybe it was on a bigger scale? But we haven't gotten those answers. One thing that someone brought up recently was the idea that services become more centralized. As sick kids moves out to the Royal, like, you can't, everyone's going to need a bus to get there, and that's going to be an increasing problem. So yes, I think that has been our challenge.
I think at this point I should follow the example of the rest of the committee and declare that my children are 26 and 22. And indeed, my son is 6'4", so the likelihood of me trying to get him in a buggy onto Lothian Bus is fairly slim. But we do obviously recognise what you've been describing today, and it is quite clear that we need to further this dialogue with Lothian Bus. And I think what the motion does today, and we'll go on to discuss it in a bit more detail in a moment amongst the committee, is that it does help to facilitate that dialogue. It's clear that the new buses that have been brought in, which have, unfortunately have brought this problem, also have brought enormous benefits in terms of the size, number of people who can be moved around, the quality of the sitting experience for any passenger, you know, etc., etc. So there are some very good, valuable aspects of those new buses. However, it's absolutely clear that this is an issue that has to be dealt with, because there are significant groups of disadvantaged customers, I think, in all sorts of senses, and I thank you very much for articulating that so clearly. Do we have any more questions from the committee? No, I think we'll now move on to consider the motion. And of course, you're more than welcome to linger for that or anything else. Thank you.
Okay, item 9.1 is a motion by Councillor Mayne. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, a composite motion has been circulated which is intended to replace the motion that's on the agenda and the amendment that's been circulated.
So I think, Councillor Burgess, are you going to propose this? Thank you.
Thanks, Convener. Just, on behalf of Councillor Mayne, happy to just propose this motion. I think everybody's seen it's been circulated and we've had a discussion of the issues, so I don't think there's any need to say anything more from me.
Okay, and do you want to formally second that?
Formally
Sorry, I apologise. I was limiting your power of your freedom of speech there. Would you like to second that, Councillor Booth?
I'm happy to formally second it, Convener.
That's what I like, a nice obedient committee. So, yes, indeed, I may be chancing my arm with that particular comment. I think, though, at this point it might be appropriate to ask if Councillor Arthur, who would have been proposing our amendment, would like to say a few words.
If you don't mind, I'll just spend perhaps a minute or two just giving you a bit of my life story here about this. So, I think the context I want to set, I think the composite motion, rather than the amendments or my earlier motion, is set within the City Centre Transformation report, which we'll see later. And what that is about creating a thriving city with opportunities for all. And I think all of us here, all of us from all parties, believe that Lothian buses are an absolutely key part of that. So these motions and this discussion isn't about having a go at Lothian buses, because I think they are part of what defines this city. One of my earliest memories is coming through Kirkcaldy from Kirkcaldy and going to the Edinburgh Zoo on a Lothian bus, which was quite exciting with my Auntie Ella. And it's also not about having a go at Alexander Dennis. I've been to their factory and I've seen these buses, not these buses getting made, but other buses getting made, and it's absolutely state-of-the-art, and it's a fantastic facility. This motion is about the procurement process that Lothian buses have went through. And really that's it. It's not Lothian buses actually, it's the Lothian buses board. Pre-launch, when we had some of the PR about these buses, concerns were raised by my constituents straight away because they spotted that the space for buggies was going to be squeezed. I went along to the launch of the bus up at Edinburgh Council in December. I spoke to the managing director of Lothian Buses about this, and he assured me there was spaces for a wheelchair and a buggy to sit side by side in the bus. He absolutely assured me. He did say that the parent couldn't sit next to the buggy, they would have to sit across the aisle, but at the time I thought that was a reasonable compromise. And I fed that back to my constituents, and they took that on board. They weren't happy, but they accepted it. Then the buses went live. I used them a few times. Then I seen Coree's petition, and I actually objected to the petition because I said, "No, you're wrong, Coree, because a bus and a buggy can fit on this. A buggy and a wheelchair can fit on this bus together, because the managing director of Lothian Buses told me that's the case." And very quickly, Coree told me I was wrong, and a number of other people told me I was wrong. So then I spoke to a board member of Lothian Buses, and she told me that space was set aside in the bus, 397 millimetres for a buggy. So I went out to Withercare, if people have already said. I measured 40 buggies using my measuring tape, and which I bought specifically for the purpose, actually. And not one of them fitted into that 397 millimetres. The only way any of those buggies could fit into that space is if they encroach on the space available to wheelchairs. And personally, I think that's unacceptable for wheelchair users to be squeezed into that space so a buggy can come in. And a lot of this discussion has focused on buggies, but I think it's also about people who have got mobility problems and people who use wheelchairs. One of my constituents, Rab Hallett, he was left sitting at the side of the road with his young kids and his wife after bus went past because he couldn't get on. He lives just a couple hundred metres away from me, and I was absolutely ashamed to hear what he said. Absolutely ashamed. And these are not that experience is not what this city is about, I don't think. So Richard Hall sent us a letter yesterday explaining the situation. Richard Hall's the managing director of Lothian Buses. He says he takes the customers' views seriously. On this issue, I'm not convinced about that. I've seen no evidence that they even looked at these number 11 and 16 routes to look at wheelchair and buggy use on those routes. I find that incredible. He talks about the majority of customers being happy, but as I pointed out earlier, the majority of customers are able-bodied, and this is about supporting minority groups as well, I think. And he says it was a commercial decision. In London, they are trialling a 3-axle bus, Transport for London. One configuration of the bus seats 99 people, but the configuration that Transport for London went with has space for a wheelchair and 2 buggies fully upright. So that's the decision they reached. The bus they have, it's a hybrid bus, whereas the Lothian buses one is diesel, and the majority of London buses with the middle exit door have a fully lowerable ramp, which the passenger can request by pressing a button at that middle exit door, whereas in Lothian buses expect people to fight against people coming on the bus to get off. But the thing is, I don't know if that bus in London is any better than the 100-seater one we've got in Edinburgh. But the point is that what's happening in London, they are trialling that bus, whereas in Lothian buses went ahead and bought 42 of these things without really consulting with anyone. And I think that's the problem at the heart of this, that lack of consultation. So I was actually reassured to hear what Coree was saying. I think she realised that we can't just dig a great big hole and put these buses into it and forget all about it. But it's about it's about thinking how we can use these buses in a way that doesn't make people feel excluded. But I think the most important thing is actually to give parents and people who support, parents and people who have disabilities, the chance to speak to Lothian buses, so Lothian buses could hear their concerns, and so the next time Lothian buses procures a new type of bus, they take that feedback on board. And that's exactly what Transport for London's doing. And if it's good enough for London, it's good enough for Edinburgh. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arthur. Do we have any other comments from the committee? In that case, I'd like to jump in and make a couple of comments at this point. I think the conversation this morning has been a very useful one. I think it's elaborated on a number of points of concern. I think we all recognise the role that Lothian Bus plays in Edinburgh life. We recognise its importance. But as a publicly owned bus company, I think we also have to recognise the fact that there's more than a commercial interest attached to this, that there is in fact a social contract with the city, and that has to include allowances for people who are in, to use a rather old-fashioned phrase, in disadvantaged groups. And so we need to make sure that that the service that is offered is appropriate for all of those groups where possible. I look very much forward to this motion being passed, as I think I get the sense from the committee. Indeed, I'm possibly jumping the democratic gun here at this point before it's taking any vote. But, and I very much look forward to the fact that we should have this opportunity to discuss this again, both at committee and in a further public meeting, if Lothian Buses MD agrees to that. I hope you will be reassured by the conversation that's happened this morning, and I hope you'll also be reassured by the fact that both myself and my vice-convener have been having detailed discussions with Lothian Bus about precisely these issues that have come forward, and I certainly hope that we'll be able to move towards a more positive resolution for the people who are asking for precisely that resolution. Thank you very much indeed. Can I take it then that we're agreed on the motion? Thank you.
Okay, that takes us back then to deputations. Could I ask the representatives from St John Vianney Primary School to come forward, please?